wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit, and now here's your host, Rich Barris.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers, folks, with the People's Pundit. I am your host, Rich Barris. We're going to have Sean Parnell on in a little bit to discuss Ukraine, the latest with the primaries. But first, we got a lot of clips I want to go through, or a clip I want to go through, because I can't help this story comes out and people say, hey, is this misinformation or is this the real deal? The truth is, folks, do we know this for sure? I'll tell you what I know. But what I do know is that the Washington Post had this story and chose not to publish it. Instead, if you go to the front page in the New York Times or the Washington Post today, you'll see a whole bunch of headlines about how bad Trump is, this indictments, blah, 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 blah. We're so unserious that we have a high-ranking, resume checked out, credible if you want to say it based on his resume, whistleblower that comes out. Two journalists report it. Both, we got Leslie Keene and Blumenthal. Blumenthal's an award-winning journalist, but Leslie and Ralph Blumenthal both have been reporting on this issue for years, know how to try to spot anyway misinformation, disinformation. All right, two very serious people in this subject matter, and they have to go to a website, the debrief.org, to publish this story because big media, now that it's published, of course, some are, hint drops, little segments of reporting, but nothing huge. You would think a story like this comes out, a high-ranking guy, his resume checks out, says, a whistleblower says that the U.S. has a UFO retrieval program. And not only do we have craft, we have had bodies in the past. Sometimes you come across the, craft. Sometimes they're unmanned, and sometimes they are not. They are piloted. So when you come across a crash, you come across the dead or dying pilots. You would think this would be huge news just like 6 months ago, before Tucker got thrown off Fox News because they can't have the boomer whisperer, as one of our viewers called him. Rupert Murdoch cannot have the boomer whisperer come on at 8 o'clock and in an hour undo the entire narrative that their daytime program has tried to put in place to mislead their viewers. You can't have him. But about 6 months ago, Tucker Carlson comes on, reports about somebody in the know, says that JFK most definitely was killed by the government, and poof, not a serious discussion about it, a whole lot of discussion about nonsense. This is how unserious of a nation we are. I hope this isn't disinformation, because you all know where I stand on this. You probably have all seen my appearance with the behavior panel and Eric Hunley, so they could basically human lie detector check whether or not they believe I was telling the truth or not. So I have had my own experience. Former President Ronald Reagan had his own experience. Former President Jimmy Carter had his own experience and was so moved by it, he actually reported it and filled out a witness affidavit. All right, so there has been this phenomenon that at the very least, some people, the stigma is really wearing off. At the very least, you should view this as a national security issue, and you would think we would have leaders. And I thought Marco Rubio was going to do that, but I guess I don't know. I don't know yet. From what I'm hearing, he's not as serious as he once pretended to be. But you would think that they would at least take this serious enough, because there could be something in our skies that we don't know what it is. And the government certainly cannot defend us from it. Honestly, I'm of the view that if there is something out there and they were hostile, or at least majority hostile, then they would have obliterated us already by now. I mean, we're not exactly. If you're them looking in on us, we're not exactly promising to look at, right? I mean, I'd pretty much view us as a virus, and I'd want to stop us from colonizing any other green or blue inhabitable planet in the galaxy. But let me play this clip. I want you guys to give me your take. What do you think of him? I always get concerned. These are because the Pentagon let him do this. And that's different than what happened with Luis Elizondo, although very clearly there is overlap here. And I'm going to tell you what I heard. I'm going to tell you what I have been told after we go through some of this, because some of the things I heard him say are things I have heard already. All right. So I hope it's not disinformation, but I get a little bit nervous when I hear that the Pentagon, unlike Mr. Blumenthal, I don't get all giddy that this could be a positive step toward the Pentagon being more transparent and open and cooperative about this issue. I don't think that's the case. I think they have a motive. They probably want money. It doesn't mean that they're not telling the truth, though. All right. So it doesn't mean Mr. Gross isn't telling the truth. All right, let's play this. Let's play this clip. And this is News Nation, The Hills, of course. Again, the Washington Post had this story. I've been told numerous people, the Washington Post had this story and chose not to run with it. So at the end of the day, like I said, Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal had to report this on their own. And when they did, of course, the connection to News Nation, The Hill has picked it up. And News Nation, of course, is part of that conglomerate. So let's go ahead and play it, and we'll be back in a hot minute. I'll probably wind up pausing it here and there to tell you something, because if I feel like I don't want to miss anything. And I want to get this over with before Sean Parnell gets in here. Oh, we're also going to plot support nationwide by candidate. Ed DeSantis tick up about 1 point, not much. I did get a lot of questions about some. Look, I'm not going to respond to other people's polls. Not all the time anyway. All I can do is do my own polls. But I will tell you that public opinion strategies and WPA intel are tools of the establishment. They've been doing this for a very long time. Even 6 months ago, folks, 3 months ago, 2 months ago, they have been wildly outside of the consensus of public polling. So if Spencer Kimball at Emerson College, all right, comes out and gives you a 60 to 18 margin in Iowa, and then 2 weeks later, WPA Intel gives you something else when there has been a slew of other Iowa polls in between, you probably should not believe WPA Intel. By the way, Alan Fung, +6, Rhode Island. Didn't happen. All right, let's roll this.
What whistleblower David Grush said yesterday, it was just the beginning. Tonight, he explains how they know these craft are not human. He tells us about other countries who also have crash retrieval programs and why he says some of the non-human life may not be friendly. New revelations from whistleblower David Grush, who says America has a UFO crash retrieval program and non-human craft in its possession. Now Grush is shedding light on exactly how the secret government program knows the craft are not of this world.
Why do you know it's exotic?
Based on the very specific properties that I was briefed on, isotopic ratios that would have to be engineered for it to be at those levels, but also just extremely strange, heavy atomic metal, high up in the periodic table arrangements that we don't understand, what the emergent properties are, but there's just a very strange mix of elements.
So all right, let me pause that there and just say that many people mocked Bob Lazar. He was a whistleblower dating back into, I believe, the late 80s, who came out and said he worked at a secret facility called S2 by Area 51, where his job was very much compartmentalized. All of their jobs were, so nobody had all of the information. But his, of course, was propulsion. And he claimed that they had discovered during this reverse engineering process one specific element on the periodic table that was used to design these crafts. He called it somebody probably knows in the audience. Unobtainium. I remember something. Anyway, he has been because they apparently the government thinks that he does know how to make this, and he has in very great detail explained how this element does need to be created or replicated. And the government has on many occasions, he runs some like rare, I don't want to say chemical, but he sells these like crazy things people would want to buy for laboratory. And he's been raided many times over this element that apparently they believe he knows how to create and make. Some people had said for a long time Bob Lazar was debunked. There has been new information that has come out and very much corroborates what Bob Lazar had claimed. All right, so he's an open question to a lot of people, but this is one of them. Also, another one is how they were able to enter the facility back in the late 80s. He was claiming was this device that you put your hand in, which measured crazy details about your hand, not your palm print or anything, but crazy details, the length between your middle finger and other fingers and parts of your palm, and that crazy. And we later found out that that device did in fact exist. All right, let's roll.
Absolutely sure that the materials that these craft are made of are clearly not of this earth.
Yeah, they're sophisticatedly engineered, certainly not by humans.
David Grush is a former high-level intelligence officer, Air Force veteran, and member of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, the U.S. task force that investigates UFOs. But he says another secret government program exists to study crashed crafts.
These are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, call it spacecraft if you will, non-human, exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
I can't wait to put Sean in the hot seat and ask him what he has to think about this. But I can tell you, I did have a liaison in the military who one day after having several too many drinks did tell me, if you go across the street at Fort Bragg, which for anybody who knows what I'm talking about, you have JFK Special Warfare Center where they train Green Berets. There isn't a part of the base, which is technically run by the CIA. Anyway, that's where Delta is. And he one day just jokingly blurted out, we were talking about assignments, and he jokingly blurted out that you could go across the street and beg them to be on the alien spaceship retrieval task force. And so I was like, no way. This was a career goal of mine. All right. But who knows whether looking back, who knows whether the guy was joking or not.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
Grush sat down with investigative journalist Ross Coulthart, who is reporting for News Nation on the bombshell whistleblower complaint filed with Congress and the Intelligence Community Inspector General. According to the complaint, in July 2021, Mr. Grush confidentially provided UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena related classified information, to the Department of Defense Inspector General. At that time, Mr. Grush communicated classified information about the improper withholding and/or concealment of classified material from the U.S. Congress by certain IC elements. News Nation has confirmed Grush's credentials, but he says he can't show us the proof of the alien craft for national security reasons.
I just want to stop you and say that this was a gripe. If you had, you may be able to find it in an interview somewhere, but Luis Elizondo, who resigned in protest, who worked for the ATIP, he headed that up, the ATIP program that made news in 2017. His colleagues that he had been working with, Christopher Mellon, another one that, his credentials most definitely, you can vet them. They're most definitely credible. But he is basically royalty in the intelligence community. So I always a little skeptical, folks. There's always agendas and people have angles. I will say, though, that they did privately and in some very few other interviews have claimed that there were, in fact, at least parts that they had in their possession, and in fact wanted private testing done on them, because I guess if you did that, obviously you would get around some of the channels. But this was a major problem for him as well, that he felt like all of the information was not being shared. And how could you really do your job if there are other areas of the government that are not sharing this information with you?
In a somewhat frightening revelation, Grush claims the non-human species may not be friendly.
I've been told that there have been attempts to bring down craft.
Before the Ayatollah overthrew the Shah in Iran, there was a very, now it's known, there was an incident where they did scramble an Iranian pilot with the U.S. knowledge and help. They were U.S. planes to try to take down a UFO. He made a fool out of him, and he sent them in a spit. Apparently, this is a record. I mean, this is a public record. He sent them in a nosedive, and basically put him out of the fight. And then there has also been other things that we've heard that Brazil and Brazil and others, the U.S. has been bullying them for years, that this has been going on for decades, folks. In their article, they'll claim that it's like a Cold War arms race to retrieve this technology. And bottom line is that we would bully other countries, that Brazil had recovered something, etc., and that they were able to take it from their possession.
We've acted offensively against non-human craft.
There have been instances, and there are certain techniques.
Have human beings been hurt or killed by a non-human intelligence?
While I can't get into the specifics because that would reveal certain U.S. classified operations, I was briefed by a few individuals on the program that there were malevolent events like that.
Grush says he has to be careful about providing detail. He shared this letter with us from the Department of Defense, giving him permission to do the interview with News Nation. It says the interview questions are approved for public release. However, this approval does not include any photograph, picture, exhibit, caption, or other supplemental material not specifically approved by this office. Our concurrence for release does not imply DoD endorsement or factual accuracy of the material.
All right, at some point, this makes me like, okay, we'll approve it so we can start a conversation about maybe more funding or additional funding that we need to defend ourselves against UAPs, but we're not going to give you any evidence for that. So I am not for any, public item on the budget that gives them more money to do this if they are not for releasing and declassifying some of this information. This is not an issue. If this is true, this is not an issue that should be hidden from the American public. You want my money? You have to show me the evidence. Bottom line, I cut a fat check to the IRS every year. If you want to use some of that on studying alien life or visitations, you better give me some damn evidence, because you're using my money to obtain that evidence. And I've been hearing this from a lot of people over when this first happened to me and Laura, and I started literally abusing my contacts in order to try to get information, because it's world changing. It is. It really is life changing if you have an experience. And this idea that Americans can't handle this or is a load of crap. As a public pollster, we ask this question, at least once a year. We've been doing it since 2018. And you, since doing the public polling project, you guys following it, you've been following us ask this since 21? Something like that. So, from the crosstabs, there isn't some danger that evangelicals are going to lose their minds and the whole fabric of society is going to collapse. That's a load of crap. Americans can handle it. There's, in fact, an article from the late 1800s in Texas that claimed that a craft of unknown origin crashed on a judge's farm in Texas, and they buried the little guy and had a Christian burial for him. So, this is a load. In Missouri, one of he's absolutely talking about these events. In Missouri, the local sheriff called the pastor at 3 a.m. to come down and do a prayer for what they thought was a little pilot, a childlike size. So this is a load of junk. They want to keep it a secret because they want, if this is true, they want the goods. They want the goods. They want a military application. And also, from what a lot of people that are in this and have studied this is also about energy. The oil folks don't want to give up their gold. and the green new scams want their wedge. Because the green agenda is really all about redistribution of wealth. It has nothing to do with energy or the environment. That's not the goal. None of the goals set out actually change anything when it comes to the environment or it comes to energy. What it changes is power structures. What it changes is systems of government, economic definitions of the type of economy or market or not system that you have in your country. It just reshuffles the deck. So the green new scam wouldn't continue if we did find some alternative source of power that really doesn't benefit either one of their agendas.
Grush says the United States is not the only country that has encountered non-human intelligence. He says our geopolitical rivals have their own crash retrieval programs.
We're in a competition with their adversaries to understand this. And it's a multi-decade Cold War that has been under our nose for so long. And, there is no good way to level the playing field and hold other nation states accountable if they're doing unethical or illicit activity as it relates to this subject. And I think the obtuse secrecy is actually putting us in a very dangerous position where a country might make a breakthrough. Let's say it's an adversary of ours. And it is so destabilizing.
The secrecy is the main reason Grush says he is coming forward. He's concerned Congress is being kept in the dark, and it's a matter of national security.
And therein lies, think about this issue, okay? We talk about it all the time in the context of like Crossfire Hurricane, illegal spying on citizens, et cetera, et cetera. Think about the implications of Congress's abdication. They've abdicated their duty to conduct oversight over the agencies, especially intel agencies, that they were designed to oversee. So they're no longer attempting to be their watchdogs, the guardians of, against their, frankly, unfettered power. They're no longer doing that. They're now in bed with them, and they're now, joined at the hip, and they're aiding and abetting things that they have done that were wrong, especially depending on the party that controls Congress. Look at Adam Schiff. He did nothing to curb the abuses of power that we saw during the Trump administration that were directed at subverting the Trump administration. Think about the implications of that with an issue like this. Far scarier. Far scarier. I mean, absurd. If we're going to concede that most, if not all, of this is true, that's a terrifying prospect, and they're doing nothing apparently to change that, because people like Christopher Mellon, he has contacts on the Hill, he's got contacts in the intelligence community, have been pushing for Congress to have more participation in this issue. And starting a couple years ago, he was making some efforts, and you had a lot of big promises from some big people. And if this is the truth, then they haven't been doing their job at all. Because if you read that article, there are no shortage of people who will corroborate what he's saying. They just didn't want to be the first to come forward. But once Grush did come forward, there are active and retired people cited in that article corroborating what he's saying. So that was hard for Marco Rubio and others to find. They're not doing anything, as usual. Passing the buck, sitting on their asses, collecting a check. And by the way, it's also widely believed in these circles, what he was just talking about with this decades-old Cold War arms race that he was just talking about. It is widely believed that President Kennedy did not want to continue like that he, in fact, wanted to share information. People like Reagan as well were rumored to want to share this information, the advances in reverse engineering, because that's supposedly why Reagan went to the UN and said, Imagine how petty our differences would seem if we were all faced as one species with a threat from an alien race. So him, JFK, they allegedly wanted to share information, share the results of these studies that were being conducted. And that obviously leads many to believe that's why JFK ended up with his brains all over Jackie's lap in Dallas.
This is not a question I had on my bingo card.
So funny.
Last week, it is not my
So
spot. Although I am a defense
Bingo
appropriator,
card.
I am part of classified briefings. This is nothing that has come up.
I saw the report. It sounds fascinating, but if there's anything there, we gotta investigate. Just like we would investigate a foreign country that has a balloon over our sky.
You know, I find it funny. I find it funny that Democrats who are supposed to be the forward-thinking, super educated, credentialed, progressive, right? The word progressive. I find it so funny how they mock things like this. I find it funny how they mock Space Force, right? They're the ones who are supposed to be so forward-thinking. Yet a congressman from Tennessee sits down with Steve Bannon Friday night and has a 40-minute conversation about this issue and how he's not been able to make any headway whatsoever. Does anybody else find that a little bit ironic? Why are the Republicans in Congress the only ones who seem particularly interested? Especially since it was supposed to be a Democrat who got a tip going. Well, it was Ted Stevens as well. He just doesn't get any credit because Stevens isn't with us anymore. But Harry Reid, at that time, the most powerful man in the U.S. Senate. Now look at his party. I wonder what he thinks now. I wonder what he would think if he was still alive. How unserious they take this when he himself took it very, very seriously. Probably not a coincidence that he was chummy with Bigelow. You know, I got to leave it there. Send me your comments. Tell me what you think. Again, I'm always skeptical anytime I see it, though, folks, because the Pentagon is always looking for money. They're always looking for more and more money, an excuse to get more money. And on one hand, I take this issue very seriously, and because of my own, my own experiences. But on the other hand, I am skeptical always of anything that government is using to advance some angle or agenda that they have that is most of the time in the Pentagon, folks, is not the real agenda. The one publicly is not the real agenda. Speaking of which, that's a perfect time to bring on my next guest. All right. So he's here. Is he ready to go, Laura? He looks like he's ready. He's ready to rock. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring on Sean Parnell. Sean, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. I'm sure you were dying to be introduced after a segment on UFOs. How you doing, buddy?
Actually, I'm super excited about the fact that UFOs, that the U.S. government has had alien aircraft in their possession for God knows how long, and maybe even extraterrestrial life forms that they've been studying. So I got to admit that's kind of exciting. As somebody who came up watching the movie Independence Day when Will Smith was still cool, I'm very, very excited, and I hope that they're not hostile. I hope that they're just I hope that they're chill,
So then let me ask you, right off the bat, obviously, then I think we all know the answer, because I do, and I'll say I do. You believe Mr. Grosh? No, you believe him?
I do. I watched his interview, and when you see military people talking about their service, and you've served yourself, you have a very keen eye and ear towards phrases and acronyms and sayings that are authentic. And you can also see a lot from his body language and bearing during that interview. And he's obviously got, the bona fides to back it up. He's got a legitimate top secret clearance that was compartmentalized for exactly what he was doing. So, we'll see. And I also think it's interesting, Rich, that at least I didn't see anything today where the Pentagon refuted his claims at all. Have you?
No, so far, all they're saying is we've approved him to come forward and discuss the content, because this is something people have to understand too about the military. This started as a complaint to the inspector general, and him being at ATIP saying they're high, or now it's the new version of ATIP, but him being there and saying, I need access to this stuff to do my job, and they're hiding it from me. They're keeping it from me, so I can't do my job. And the inspector general took this claim has been taken very seriously, and they are. I mean, believe me, folks, that the military they don't move on things they don't find to be of importance or have a priority. So them approving him to come forward and saying this, the only thing I've seen, Sean, is them say, just we're approving it, but it doesn't mean when it comes to they didn't even mention specifics like the alien bodies retrieved themselves, but they're saying, look, it just isn't a confirmation or a denial about the content of what he's saying. But that, I mean, Sean, if it wasn't true, the military would say this is not true, right? I mean, this is my experience.
I mean, I guess. I mean, things are so crazy in this day and age, Rich. The reality is, I don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
I first of all, I never thought we'd see an actual story like this really in my lifetime. And I guess what I'm equally surprised about, Rich, is the fact that this isn't a bombshell story leading in on the front page of every single newspaper and every single national TV show in the country. I mean, this is big news, but I think it just speaks to the fact that our priorities in this country are just so jacked up right now. It's just things are just so crazy, but that aliens are like, the existence of UFOs and aliens and hypersonic aircraft flying over our cities and reconning military bases potentially is not even a front page story in this day and age.
I remember when Bob Lazar, and this was the late 80s, I remember when he came out and said, and he had shadowed his face, the first couple of interviews with that local Vegas media outlet. But then it blew up and it became not just national news, international news. It was a huge story. And he was just saying, look, I work at a secret facility called S2. It's not on, but near Area 51. And I reverse engineer alien spaceships. That went nuts. And now today, and I brought this up too, 6 months ago, Tucker goes on and says, I got a source who has direct knowledge and the government absolutely played a part in the assassination of JFK. And it's not news, Sean. It's not news. What is Trump's record-keeping violations? I mean, just ridiculous stuff, man. Ridiculous stuff.
It really is. And by the way, Bob Lazar, I don't know if any of y'all who are watching or listening right now know who that guy is, but I've watched many of his interviews, and go watch his interview on Rogan and judge it for yourself. He comes off as very credible as well. And another thing about Bob Lazar is he hates the spotlight. He doesn't want people reaching out to him. He doesn't want people talking to him. He doesn't want people coming to his house with signs and telling them about the time that they were taken by aliens or something like that. He doesn't like any of that stuff. And he has had his life essentially ruined because of coming out and talking about all this stuff. And I half wonder now, Rich, how he feels. Does he feel vindicated now that maybe some of this? I mean, look, there's still a lot that remains to be seen, but I guess the inspector general has it and says it's a very, very credible claim. And so, I mean, if they thought it was some crazy conspiracy theory, and by the way, I hate using that term because over the last 3 or 4 years, conspiracy theories, I'm out of them, frankly. Many of them have come true. And it's a term that, our intel agencies use to discredit people that think for themselves, that think critically. It's just a conspiracy theorist. It's like, well, yeah, maybe you could say that. But when I was growing up and in school, my teachers just taught me that was baseline critical thinking. It doesn't mean you're always going to have the right answers, but thinking for yourself is important. But we'll see what happens with it. But it's exciting, man. And by the way, you leading in with that segment, to me, that's very exciting. I'm super psyched about that.
Every year, Sean, we ask people about 4 questions about UFOs. Gallup used to do it, and then they just stopped. So I'm thinking this is a good opportunity You know, and I remember in 2018, which the ATIP story broke, you know, that people still were, you know, 12% roughly were saying that they had a personal experience, you know, and a pretty good amount had been saying that, you know, that they believed this was visitation from an extraterrestrial intelligence because of how we word it. It's been going up every year, steadily every year. And, you know, this idea that people can't deal with it, like if it was true, and they're hiding it because they don't have to hear this. This is a good one. The fabric of society will come apart. I mean, it just doesn't be true. The most the most faith-based, you know, like a Southern evangelical is just as interested in this as a, you know, like a post-grad secular person in New York City. You know, it's just not true. Like, so the stigma that they've tried to make, it has no factual basis. It just doesn't. So, you know, eventually over time, I think it'll get easier to talk about, Sean. I do. Let me ask you this though, because this is a good way to go into Ukraine after, but you know, I do get a little skeptical about the Pentagon. You know, maybe they're fishing for a bigger budget. But I mean, there's easier ways to get money, isn't there? I mean, look at Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right now, the Pentagon and defense contractors, they don't seem like they want for much right now. It certainly seems like they're getting what they want with regards to Ukraine. I mean, what if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, and some people have called it a money laundering operation for the elite and for defense contractors. I think that's probably pretty accurate when you look at all the weapons that we're sending over there. Our stockpiles here are running low. So what does that mean? That means that those weapons have to be replaced, and nobody wants that more than the defense contractors who make the weapons. And so, you know, I think people are kind of fat and happy over at the Pentagon, maybe even in the literal sense, if you paid attention to what's happening with our woke military in today's day and age. I don't know. It seems like the standards have gone down a little bit from when I was in, and it's not to say that I'm still a huge fan of people who raise their right hand and volunteer to serve, but it just feels different. But to your point, Rich, I do think that there are probably easier ways to do it. And I guess you got to ask yourself, what does this whistleblower have to gain for himself? Right.
Yeah.
I guess like maybe in the moment he would have some fame, but if what he's saying isn't true, first of all, would the IG say that it's credible? If it wasn't, probably not, as the IG is a member of the system and has all the reason in the world to, you know, say, oh, this is just a crazy conspiracy theory. In fact, in fact, this guy is risking a heck of a lot coming out and talking about this stuff. And frankly, you know, people in this country, you know, and if you watched any of like what Tucker said, which I'm sure you did, Rich, but he said, you know, we have a real overclassification problem in this country. Everything's classified. And that kind of stuff, like when you see countries that overclassify documents or information, it really is just a way from keeping information or keeping the people from having information required to make critical decisions in their lives, or decisions about how to vote, or, you know, what government institutions should get what funding. I mean, it really just keeps information from the people, and that's not how constitutional republics are supposed to operate. But yeah, I doesn't seem like the Pentagon's wanting for much right now.
Yeah, that's, you know, I guess that's my problem, is that if you're going to want money from me, then you got to show the goods. You know, you just can't hide stuff, you know, the way that they're doing. And I actually, I was Clapper and, you know, somebody else. It was it's still on Netflix right now. 9/11 was that moment where, of course, there was I'm sure there was overclassification before, but it just blew up after 9/11. And the reasons that I've always heard about why that is, we're sharing more, but we're sharing more within agencies and departments, but we're also classifying a lot more. So really all that does is like increase the gap between what people know, the average person, and then what, you know, the people who do the government work or dealing with these issues, what they know. So, and then it leads to that, of course, I know better than you, or I know more than you. And we heard that a lot back right after 9/11. Well, what are the reasons for making this decision? Why, pivoting to Iraq, things like that. The answer was always, Sean, well, you don't know everything they know, or that's always, and even in the military, you'll hear that a lot. It's not your job to really question a lot, but if you ever did, that's the first thing they're going to tell you. That's above your pay grade. Superiors know more than what you know. So
That's right.
I don't know.
That's exactly right. I mean, where we are now, and certainly with our leaders, both elected leaders and appointed, they just want hey, look, we know better. Accept what we believe as truth because we know more than you. And the fact of the matter is, I think that's backwards. I think that, and this is part of the reason why, if you believe that politics is downstream from culture, right? How do you control that? In other words, if you say politics is downstream from culture, then you believe that the knowledge that people have influence the way that they vote, and the way that they vote influences policy change in Washington. But a way to control that or flip that script on its head is overclassifying everything to where people don't know anything, and they're spoon-fed information and propaganda, and they're spoon-fed what exactly to believe. And really, Rich, if you look at everything that has happened in the last 4 years, okay, go back to 2018 with the Russia hoax, and give my personal experience, right? Like, Connor Lamb was voted into power in Western Pennsylvania in 2018, primarily because the Russia hoax was foisted on the American people. You had many Republicans thinking like, well, my God, could this possibly be true? If it is true, boy, I want to check on that in Washington. And come to find out 4 years later, that's completely bogus. And then you have what happened in 2020 and all the issues that we had with the election. You had Wolf come out and say, not our governor, but I think Homeland Security, say it was the most secure election in the history of our country. So first of all, that's the first red flag, because anytime there's a government official that says anything like that, you immediately know it's garbage. Of course, it's not the most secure election in history. It's the first time we've implemented mass mail-in ballots in many battleground states only. Of course, there are going to be logistical issues. And then you had all this stuff with the lockdown and closing of private businesses and loved ones forced to die alone. And then when you talk about the vaccine, it initially started 100% effectiveness against COVID. Now it's down to now you need 100 different boosters to have 5% protection. So, and by the way, if you question those narratives, Rich, you were called a conspiracy theorist, a whack job. In some cases, you were fired. I mean, so what reason do people have to believe the government in today's day and age? So it's just, Rich, it's just, we live at a time where critical thinking is not so popular, where leaders, frankly, on both sides of the aisle want to tell you what to think rather than give you the information to make decisions on your own. And I think that has put our country in a very, very, very dangerous place.
And then you have our elected members of Congress. That guy's job is to oversee stuff like this. And he's asked a question by the media, and he says, that question wasn't on my bingo card tonight. It's not even a serious answer, Sean. These people they're not serious enough for the problems that we have. And then, the lack of faith that people have in them, not just elected, but unelected government, the faith that they've lost in them, it goes to look at the bridge. This is a good time to bring up this bridge. And I don't want to butcher the name. Somebody knows it better than I do, then all for it. So the dam in Ukraine, immediately. And this is a great part of what Tucker was saying in that, by the way, but immediately, all of these people who have lied about everything over the years come out and Russia did it. There's no evidence. They have no evidence Russia did, but immediately they're going to move to this position that Russia did it, just like Nord Stream pipeline. There's no motive whatsoever none that I can really think of, for Putin to have done that, or at least Ukraine would have more of a motive. But no, you just said critically thinking isn't popular anymore. That's a perfect example. People don't ever sit back and say, what the media is telling me, it just doesn't make sense. Let me work this through. Let me see who has the most to gain, who had the most to lose. What's your take on this dam being blown up? And the counteroffensive in general, because that's another great example. We were told Ukraine was winning this war. right? I mean, a year ago, the Russian army was starving. They were abandoning their posts in mass. It was basically falling apart. The tank tracks were falling off as they were trying to go up the road. I mean, just ridiculous levels of propaganda. What's your take on this? I mean, we have Republican candidates doing town halls on it.
Yeah, right. So let's start with the dam and the national response by many of the power brokers in the media was Putin's a damn war criminal. We gotta stop him. It's like, okay, but in order for you to believe that, then you have to believe everything that our intelligence agencies and our government is telling you, which after everything that I just said, from the Russia hoax to the 2020 election to COVID to the vaccines and everything else, how could you possibly believe anything the government says in this day and age? So that's step one. Rich, this is precisely why it's so dangerous for the people to not. And by the way, this is apolitical. I mean, Democrats and Republicans, we're all going to process this information that we get on our own if it's accurate in different ways, and we're going to vote our conscience, right? But that's where the media plays such an important role, not to be a lapdog to this to people in authority, but to be a watchdog. And so you see all of these people on Twitter with the Ukrainian flag in their bio, when they don't really have a full understanding of just the geopolitical complexity of what's happening over there. You talked about what we were told initially about Russia was losing and they're inept and everything else. The bottom line is this. This is where I think we are. This is just my personal take. The best you can hope for in Ukraine right now is a standoff that will last over a decade, and I don't think that that's acceptable. I think that the loss of life on both sides will be high. And if America has a role, it's to provide leadership, global leadership, to find a diplomatic solution to what the end state looks like. Because what I'm afraid of, and this is a real grave fear that I have, having spent 20 years of my life, I'm 41 years old, or 20 years of my life. I was in the military for almost 7, but half of my life was spent fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've lost 30 of my very, very close friends to the Afghan war. And to the people who are watching and listening right now, what do we have to show for those conflicts?
Yeah.
Not only, like, we've lost some of America's best and brightest who raised their right hand to volunteer to defend this country after we attacked. Like, those people are special, and we have absolutely nothing to show for it. We still have Americans stuck on the ground in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And yet we are clamoring to walk into another fight in Ukraine without fully understanding what's going on. And yes, we gave them over $100 billion, and the Ukrainians are doing the fighting, and that you have senators and congressmen, both the Republican and Democrats, saying this is the best money that we've ever spent because Americans aren't actually doing the fighting. But if it's a 10-year stalemate, the likelihood of Americans being boots on the ground doing the fighting goes up exponentially every year. So if you're an American and you're watching this and you're trying to get accurate information on Ukraine, and by the way, that's part of the problem. I think Americans don't know where they can go to get accurate information. But if you're trying to figure out what the heck is going on in Ukraine, and you've got a Ukrainian flag in your bio because you think it's cool, and you want to defend freedom from evil dictators. And by the way, I do too. I hate Putin. The world would probably be better off tomorrow if he passed off the face of the earth. But the point that I'm trying to make is Ukraine so important to your family right now, at this point in time in history, where you're willing to send your own son and daughter over there to die for Ukraine? If the answer to that question is no, take the Ukrainian flag out of your bio, because frankly, this is where we're going. And Rich, I don't have to tell you, as somebody who was in the army for a short time, the situation in Ukraine and fighting a war with Russia, it's hard to imagine a situation that's more dangerous than Afghanistan and Iraq, but it's more complicated and more dangerous than Afghanistan and Iraq because they have different weapon systems. And oh, by the way, our military has not evolved sufficiently to combat a conventional threat. 20 years ago, Rich, we evolved our military from fighting a Cold War Soviet Russia to brigade combat teams in the army that were compartmentalized to fight asymmetric counterinsurgency threats.
That's right.
Russia is a conventional threat with armor and air power. I don't even think that we have Stinger missiles directly supporting infantry platoons. So God forbid if Americans found themselves on the ground, how would they defend themselves from an air attack? I mean, we're not ready for this fight. Americans haven't thought it through, and Republicans and Democrats, after failing 20 years of failure, I'm sorry, I hate to say it. And by the way, I'm proud of my service in Afghanistan. I would do it all over again in a second. The men that I met there were amazing. I took great pride in protecting and taking care of the Afghans and going after America's enemies. And if America was ever directly threatened, Rich, I'd be the first to volunteer to go. But we need to our leaders need to take a deep breath, figure out what the heck is going on, and not clamor to get us into another fight, because the stakes are high and I don't want to sacrifice another, I've got a 16-year-old, one of my oldest, I got 5 kids and an amazing blended family. My 2 oldest, 16 and 14 respectively. In 2 years and 4 years, they could find themselves fighting in Ukraine. And that's not something that I can tolerate. I hate the idea of that. And I think that Americans need to think long and hard about what an escalation of war in Ukraine looks like and really push to pursue a diplomatic solution there.
Yeah, I got to say this, Sean. I think you do. You honor that service and those sacrifices by telling the truth about what happened and what could happen going forward in a conflict like the one we're seeing in Eastern Europe right now. It doesn't honor them or your own service to lie and tell the same stories that got us into those other conflicts. Now, Afghanistan, that's one thing. Iraq, something different. It really was, and we weren't learning quick enough as to what kind of fight that was to be as successful as we could have been. And the truth is, a lot of the military, their own analysis does warn right now that we spent 2 decades trying to build up unconventional forces to fight a counterinsurgency or a terrorist insurgency, and that we're not prepared for this kind of fight. And they just seem to ignore it. They think building more weapons prepares you for that. As if, I heard Petraeus a couple of weeks ago asking, he was doing a talk about, from his experience of what he did in both Iraq and Afghanistan. But in his experience, he was trying to apply that towards what would he do with the situation in Ukraine. And he was talking as if we were a force that was ready for a conventional great power conflict. And it stunned me because he's not a dumb guy. That's not true. Nothing he's saying is true. And he's not stupid. So what is the motivation there? And going, right to the damn thing. In Newsweek, Sean, and it's being reprinted on MSN, it says the headline is that the Kakhovka dam explosion will be devastating for Ukraine for one main reason. And the entire article is to say that Ukraine wouldn't have done this because of the water supply, right? Meanwhile, the expert in the article says this. Not just myself, many experts believe that this situation will deprive Crimea of water for years. Who controls the Crimea? I mean, this is just it's just nuts to me. And yes, of course, it's going to be it's going to impact Ukrainians as well. But if this is downstream from the main source that supplies Crimea, then this was not in Putin's best interest to do at all. I don't understand why that doesn't.
Let me give you I completely agree with you. And let me say this, I'll just tell you a personal story from Afghanistan to help set this conversation up. I was on a mission cycle for a week in Afghanistan. I mean, that was basically our mission cycles. And we were on the border there. And during that time in 2006, we had a CH-47 helicopter that crashed in Eastern Afghanistan. It was an unbelievable and tragic disaster. We lost Lieutenant Colonel Finty. He was a lieutenant colonel. Many of that battalion staff, the battalion staff, and I think the unit. God, it's been so long. But 371 Cav was, I think, the unit. But my parents, if you can imagine, all they saw on the news was 10th Mountain Division soldiers in Eastern Afghanistan killed. So you can imagine the fear that they had trying to figure out, like, was I on that bird? Was I doing an air assault on that bird? They didn't actually get the truth, and the casualties weren't named for over a week. In fact, I actually got back from my mission cycle and called home before they were actually given official word from the US government. So my point is this. Why the hell do all these people have opinions about the attack on the dam in Ukraine when they have absolutely no information whatsoever about what actually happened? None. It's impossible. There's a reason why the term fog of war, it's a real thing. It takes time to sort out what happens.
Yes.
And when you integrate clandestine operations, and we worked with the CIA, and they're incredible. We worked with the CIA in Afghanistan. And when you integrate clandestine operations, it just becomes even more murky, because frankly, China would have a great reason to blow up that dam and keep the conflict going between Ukraine and Russia, and keep the United States of America's collective eye focused on that region instead of on a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan. I'm just saying, like, there are a million other possibilities for what could possibly happen to that dam. I think the least likely of which are what people are saying 24 hours after the fact. Like, it's just
they know, as if they know,
and that is dangerous. It's dangerous. And I'll tell you this, Rich, my perspective on a lot of this stuff has changed over time. After 9/11, I joined the military. I mean, I was clamoring to get in the fight. I believed in phrases like defend freedom, and I still do. Like I said, if America was ever threatened, I'd be first in line to fight for this country. I love this country. I would die for this country. But like, what looking back on the situation and what happened in Iraq, and how long we were in Afghanistan, even after we killed Osama bin Laden, like, how were we right? How were our military leaders correct in our assessments of what was happening on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan? We lost. I mean, we found ourselves in a situation where we won every military battle that we were in, but we lost politically, and I think, what this whole experience has shaped my perspective in that, like, our government owes us more clarity, right? Like cliche phrases like, we have to fight them there to protect us here, or
out of my mouth.
We need to just, defend freedom, which again, I believe, but it's trite and it's cliche. And these situations are immense, like, just so much more complicated, Rich. And we owe it, if we're going to send America's sons and daughters, which is, these people are like our most precious asset in this country. If we're going to send them somewhere to fight, you better be damn well sure you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. It's just immensely frustrating to me to see Republicans and Democrats beating these war drums and almost hoping for an escalation in the war in Ukraine. It's just so frustrating.
Yeah, as I get older, I get less, well, not even less. I mean, I am now war weary. When I was young and 9/11 happened, very much like you, I was, give me a drum, I'll beat it myself,
Yeah, exactly.
As I get older, I just look at different things, that they do owe us more because of how much they bungled everything. But they don't feel that we're entitled to that. And that's true of everything. So they're going to go forward with political persecutions and prosecutions in this country after the Durham report just came out and eviscerated their honor. And yet they don't feel that we're entitled still, to something more, to more truth. Same thing with conflicts, moving forward. If you Afghanistan was the longest U.S. war in history. I mean, the longest running war. You spent all that money, all that blood, all that treasure, right? And had really nothing to show for it at the end of the day, except for the death of Osama bin Laden. You owe us more in the future. and they don't feel that we are owed that, Sean. And that's really tragic, because Ukrainians are I'd be surprised if 10 years, a 10 years, I'd be surprised if it got that long. They are being bloodlet over there. And I don't know how long this could keep up without more Western bodies. At the beginning of this, there were people from all over the world. I'm going to go and fight with Ukraine. I know people who did that. I'm going to volunteer to go fight beside the Ukrainians. Well, good luck and more power to you. I'm not. I'm going to fight for my family and the future of my own country right here while you go do that. Because, Sean, we're going to lend another nation bodies when we have devastating fertility rates that we can't even guarantee forget about safeguarding the continuing of our own culture and our own nation. We're in the current state that we're in now. We're going to lend ourselves like Hessian mercenaries to other countries. This is crazy to me. We have to make sure you said they're our most precious commodity. They are the future. They're the future of our future discoveries and medicines and sciences and engineering. And, I just don't see how you could spend that on something like this.
And look, I am someone who believes that as the world's preeminent superpower, we do have a responsibility to help pursue peace wherever we can, to help stabilize the world. Because if America is deposed as the global superpower and China fills that void, because, oh, by the way, that's exactly what they want, and they've been working at diligently for the last 50 years, the world will be a much darker place. So the problem is that if you're not even allowed in this day and age to even ask questions about the war, you're expected to support the war in Ukraine. If you don't, you're called a Russian asset or an agent of Putin. And I'm telling you, that is dangerous, because I think the number one responsibility of an elected leader in this country, especially if you're voting to send someone to war, if you're a president, you have to make the decision to send an American into harm's way. Diplomacy needs to be first, and being careful with America's sons and daughters. I mean, we should be using them as a absolute last resort. And again, I say this as somebody who went to fight myself and understand that some things are worth fighting for. Sometimes freedom does have to be defended, but it requires a level of trust in our institutions and in our leaders for it to work. And so take yourself out of Afghanistan or Iraq. Where else did, regime change and, 20th century American foreign policy work in the last 20 years? Did it work in Libya when we deposed Gaddafi? No. What about in Egypt? No. Did it work in Syria? No. In fact, like, the entire Middle East is a powder keg. All the Iraq invasion did it. And in addition to, thousands of Americans dead and tens of thousands of wounded, was empower one of America's greatest foes in Iran. So where exactly did our foreign policy goals get us in the last 20 years? How could you possibly look at yourself in the mirror after every strategic error that we've made and said that, yeah, you know what, the world is a safer place now? The world is far more dangerous now. And it's like, you have to wonder, did we play a part in that? And so this is by the way, I don't know, like, foreign policy is immensely complicated. Diplomacy is immensely complicated. Believe me, having sat across a table from some of the most powerful people, Afghan warlords in the country, as a 24-year-old kid, I know. And if you're not around a table negotiating foreign policy, it's difficult to truly understand the nuances of it. But I will say this. This is why I appreciate Donald Trump's stance on foreign policy. Very mission focused. He's not afraid to defend freedom. But if he's sending you in there, it's going to be a surgical strike, a clear-cut end state, and then you're coming out. And I'm not saying that's always the right situation, because, again, as I mentioned, every situation that you're in is different. But I do appreciate different thinking, Rich.
He's a breath of fresh air, Sean.
It's just different. And again, it's not always going to be right, because when you're a leader and you're sending Americans into the fight, sometimes you make a bad decision. And God forbid, sometimes people come home in body bags. It's not a situation that as a Democrat or Republican, I would want any American in. But I do appreciate him asking the questions. It's so important.
Yeah, I don't know how much time you have. I got to take a real quick break. You got a couple of minutes on the other end of this?
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, give me 5 minutes. Let's go real quick, have a word from our sponsors, folks, and then I'm going to get right back to this because there's something I wanted to ask you, and I can't wait till after when we come back. It's just crazy.
Okay.
All right. But right now, folks, speaking of which, I mean, we just gave you a whole host of reasons in that segment, but authorities do fear that extremists are targeting the U.S. power grid. And that's according to Time magazine, not Breitbart or the People's Pundit. If just 9 key substations were to go down, it would knock out power across the country for up to 18 months. That's why you need a solar generator. The new Patriot Power Generator 2000X is portable, but it's powerful enough for your phones, medical devices, even your refrigerator. Right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and get one for 10% off. Use the promo code TPP10 at checkout. This code is for your first purchase, so make it count. That's 4patriots.com. Use the code TPP10 at checkout to get your Patriot Power Generator today. And I'm actually just also going to say, don't forget jamandbean.com, Patriots, and obviously a delicious product, jamnbean.com. Use the promo code TPP40, and that'll get you 40% off the first subscription. And every renewal, you'll still get 10% off. All right, there it is right there. Jam and Bean, promo code TPP40. All right, we'll come back to Jam Bean in a hot second. But yeah, Sean, it's because Trump is like a breath of fresh air because we're playing musical chairs with the same people who have been the source or the policy prescribers of all of this bad policy. And we have somebody like Blinken, who, the Iraq War, Afghanistan, this is a diplomat who never met a situation, a diplomatic crisis that he didn't want to convert into a conflict. That's the nation's top diplomat right now. I mean, a warmonger. Our nation's Secretary of Defense doesn't believe in civilian control of the military. This is the crazy place we're in right now. And the Senate confirmed this man. A standing army terrified our founding fathers. They believed that it at some point would be necessary, but that's why they wanted civilian control of it. This is a man who doesn't even believe that civilians should be able to control what the military does. And again, our nation's top diplomat doesn't believe in diplomacy. So, I mean, is it any surprise that we're in this position?
Well, it's a real good question. And I guess I would just say, Rich, maybe the reason that we find ourselves in this situation is because diplomacy is very, 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 very hard. And you have to really, really, really work at it to broker any sort of relationship or build a bridge with any sort of foreign leader when the cultures are just so vastly different. And I think in America, we are very used to having a quick fix, a quick solution to almost everything. And that has been a problem in America, stretching all the way back to the Vietnam War, when we didn't really consider the culture of Vietnam and their willingness to fight and the idea that they had time on their side. Really, the same is true in Afghanistan. And I just don't know if any of our political leaders right now, I mean, aside from some of the few veterans in the House and maybe J.D. Vance in the Senate, have the wherewithal to really focus on and ability to really focus on high level diplomacy with world leaders and have any credibility at all. Because really, I mean, I'm sorry, Blinken, what exactly have you done to qualify you to negotiate on behalf? I'm sorry. I mean, I don't mean to sound but you're right. It's musical chairs with all the same inside the Beltway people. And these people go from one, in this case, Democrat administration to the next. But frankly, Republicans have some of the same issues. And
absolutely.
And I think by and large, DC, or there's a reason why they say it's inside the Beltway. It's because all the people that live inside the Beltway think the same way. And they all just rotate jobs and work for this senator and then work in the White House. And then they're running somebody's campaign. It's that's why things don't change all that often. And that's why people fear, outsiders like President Trump and the candidates, by the way, who've come up in his image. And so I really don't like how people in the media and even some Republicans attack President Trump for the way that he thinks with regards to foreign policy. I don't like it because we could benefit with some more ideas, around the table, because again, I don't think that we can look ourselves in the mirror and think that we've been all that successful over the last 25 years.
Yeah, we don't have somebody said it in the chat. They're 100% right. We don't have any Otto von Bismarcks. Like, this stuff is hard. Statecraft is hard.
That's very well said. That's very well said. Statecraft is extremely difficult. People spend an entire lifetime doing it, and it's still immensely difficult.
And it's one of those issues too, where everyone in the Beltway, right? And they're also focused on, this kind of goes back to the first issue we're saying. They're supposed to be the educated, credentialed, progressive, and they don't listen to academia on this at all. And I always say Trump was our first realist foreign policy president. And in academia, realism just dominates. And people like Don Mearsheimer, you just can't hold a candle to. Yet in the media, they mock him. And, all the talking heads that they put on the Max Boots, the Bill Crystals, the whole lot of them. These are people that really don't know what they're talking about, and yet they're put forward as experts. And everyone in the Beltway, everyone in the halls of the State Department that are recruited and work there, they all have the same views, the same mindsets, and it actually doesn't comport with what you'll read. If you were to go and study international relations in school right now, and you got a 4-year degree, even, you don't even need an advanced degree to get this far, it's going to jump right out at you. These are people who believe in failed theories, and yet somehow they think that those theories are going to work in real world practice. And in international relations, security studies, a good theory holds up against the empirical record. So if it doesn't hold up against historical scrutiny, Sean, why do they think it's going to work, in the real world? Or if they tweak it a little bit, I mean, it's just the democratic peace theory is a perfect example. I mean, they all really believe this, and it's sad because it's not true.
I'll tell you exactly why. And I'll give a couple of different examples. As a kid, again, I was in my early 20s when 9/11 happened, wanted to be on the front lines, obviously supported the war in Afghanistan. I participated in the hunt for bin Laden. I also supported the Iraq invasion because I believed that they had weapons of mass destruction. I believed what the government was telling me. I don't anymore. They lied to me then. I've seen how often they've lied to me since. And no, trust has to be earned. And so I don't care the personal cost to me, and what names that people call me for supporting the things that I believe in my heart of hearts to be right, because the wrong decisions could mean Americans dead. So there's that. But also, what incentive is there for people to think differently? Rich, thinking differently in America today is not celebrated.
Not rewarding.
I remember a time where, I come from a family of Union Democrats. They're classical liberals. They believe in tolerance. They believe in thinking for themselves. But liberals in today's, or progressives, I should say, because there's a difference between, old school Democrats and the modern day radical progressives of the day. They believe in uniformity. They believe in always being in lockstep. That's why the radical left, like a congressman from California believes and votes the same way as a congressman in Pennsylvania, even though they represent two very different demographics in their district. They vote exactly the same. So use Tulsi Gabbard as an example. Like, she just got a battalion command. Like, I mean, there were about 1,000 different things that I probably disagree with her on. I'm not sure that I would ever vote for her, but she should be able to believe what she wants to believe. And I think we have very, very similar views with regards to foreign policy. We both served our country, but you have the left coming out and saying, even though she's a reservist and allowed to talk politics when she's in a civilian attire, she shouldn't be allowed to have a battalion command. Oh, she's just an agent, a Russian asset, an agent of Putin. Like, I'm sorry, that's the dumbest, uncritical stuff I have ever heard. Yet you hear it over and over and over again from many of the online influencers on social media on the radical left, from all other academia folks, from every power broker on these left-wing networks. They will come after you. They will ruin your life. So why? again, like going back to Trump, like he's a billionaire, like, and look, they're trying to ruin his life. I think anybody that's paying attention to what's happening in our country can see the persecution of Donald Trump for being an outsider. And again, that doesn't mean you have to always agree with what he says. Like, I think most people can look with a fair eye and think like, oh man, come on. Like, we're still going after this guy. Like, really? But the reality is there's no incentive. We haven't cultivated an environment in this country where asking questions and thinking for yourself gets you anywhere or anything but scorn. And in some cases, like you lose your ability to even earn a living. So it's just much safer for people to just all believe the same thing. And I think that's to the detriment of America.
Yeah, that's well said. I even remember, although I was like you, I did believe basically everything they told us. I remember when Pat Tillman was killed in action, they immediately used it to their advantage. I don't know if you had a similar experience, but with us,
they lied about it.
They lied about it. They were like, they got him, men. They got him, men. I'll never forget it. They were like, they got Pat Tillman, and they used it as a way to make us angry and not pay attention to something else that you may have, again, it's not your job to question. You follow orders in the military, folks. You're not going to be sitting there like the philosopher king from Plato's book and, thinking about these things in great detail. You're told what to do and that's it.
Exactly.
But you think, why would they lie? Why would they lie about something like Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction? Pat Tillman was killed by friendly fire. Like, why would they lie about stuff like that? It doesn't dawn on you. And Laura said in the chat before, well, the worst thing they really happened to us in the post 9/11 world, not listening or not questioning whether they were telling the truth, was something like the Patriot Act. To let them start to do things at home that before 9/11 we would never have tolerated. Never. I mean, I remember what it was like to walk through an airport before 9/11. And again, I understand that some things have to change and as the world changes, but this is something we become accustomed to accepting. This is a danger. So we need advanced tools. We need to, basically violate the Fourth Amendment on a daily basis. We need to do this. It's all for your benefit. And if the last 10, 20 years hasn't woken you up, because I don't think people really, until the election of Barack Obama, I don't think people really question certain things. It was an unpopular conflict in Iraq, but it wasn't like we weren't there yet. We really weren't. But this is why I think some people too, we're really talking about grievance, right? And they don't want to hear that, Sean, at all. So you're from Western Pennsylvania. I want to put this up. I told the audience we were going to plot support nationally today. I haven't gotten the new crosstabs up yet, but here are the interviews, and it may be a little bit hard for you to see, but I got this. We went to this new thing for data. It's called Data Wrapper. It's really cool. And I'm not getting anything pitching Data Wrapper, folks. All right. But the audience knows I've been wanting to do this. We would do it in a still image, but I wanted something that's interactive. So when you hover over the interview, Sean, you can click on it and you can see who completed that interview, what age they are they a male, they a female, and what their answers were. Look at your state. Let me put this up. So red is Donald Trump. Blue is Ron DeSantis. All right. And this is as of June 3rd. So I just was dealing with Florida and everything else. So I'm a little bit behind, but I'm getting there. Overall, we had DeSantis tick up about a point. So he's at 18% now. Trump is just under 60. If you round, it's 60, just like I'm rounding and giving Ron DeSantis the benefit of the doubt. About 3.1 chose someone else. About 5% said they're still undecided. So not a whole lot of decided there. You know what you could see right off the bat is the strength that Trump has in the mid-Atlantic. Look in Western Pennsylvania. This isn't margins, folks. This is when the interviews are clustered together. They're so close that they're overlapping. So that means there's like 7 more in Western Pennsylvania where Sean's from. Even in Northeastern Pennsylvania, look at that margin. I mean, again, that's not a margin, but there are literally 3 interviews you can see here, but then 30 more in Northeastern Pennsylvania. And every single one of them, Sean, chose Donald Trump. Every single one of them. I mean, and then of course you can see it in the Rust Belt. You can see it in the South, even in the Sun Belt. Florida looks a little bit more competitive, but we just put that poll out the other day. He is ahead of DeSantis pretty significantly in Florida. All through the Western Plain states, the Southwest from Texas on, he's dominant. And even in California, he was ahead. So, it's like these people hate this guy. They just can't understand this.
Wow.
That's the thing. I mean, Sean, help if you were explaining to one of these people why this map looks this way, why do people support Donald Trump? What would you say to them?
You? I mean, look, I in 2020, if you paid attention to my political career at all, I mean, I ran in PA 17, which is a Western Pennsylvania swing district. I mean, everybody, by the way, Rich, says it's even. It's not. In 2020 it was a D+ district. In 2022, it was much more favorable to Democrats, and we can get into that. And again, everyone in the media just it's even. It's not. But it really was a national bellwether, and I overperformed President Trump in Western Pennsylvania and in PA 17 by 2 points. And you know what, Rich? I didn't run from him at all. I didn't. I had my own viewpoints. I was able to articulate, where I disagreed with him on certain issues, but Western Pennsylvania, you're looking at the state of Pennsylvania, and it's a very, very critical swing state. If you're a Republican, I call it the Western Wall, right? In the Western Wall Western Pennsylvania is a very, very heavily Republican area, like Allegheny County. Many know Allegheny County to be a Democrat county, and it is, but it's also the most populous Republican county in the entire state. You perform well in Allegheny County, Butler County, Beaver County, all the way up to Erie and all the way south to Greene. You overperform with Republicans there, you're going to do real well statewide. So that's the first point. But there are also a lot of, blue collar union Democrats who will never break away from President Trump. They just won't. My family is a great example of folks just like this. And these people are Democrats. They're not going to change their voter registration. They're proud Democrats. But they're going to support President Trump because they believe that he has the backs of, building trade unions, and building trades, and the trade unions are, I mean, it's woven into the fabric of Western Pennsylvania. I mean, Davis-Bacon was primarily is a law that was put into place that union people love, is primarily focused on Western Pennsylvania, and the idea that migrants undercut American wages. And so, boy, doesn't that speak to the situation that we're in right now with the immigration, people streaming across our southern border. Union folks in Western Pennsylvania believe that Donald Trump has their back. So not only is he going to perform well with Republicans there, as it looks like, as evident by your poll, but he's also going to pull those union Democrats and enough independents to perform very strongly in a Republican primary in Pennsylvania.
But I did see your tweet too. With Turning Point USA, partnered with Scott Pressler and brought Scott Pressler on. I'll tell you what, that's the kind of work they're going to need to do out there, because people ask me that all the time. They watch, Republicans. They watch Scott Pressler running all over the country doing this hard work, and I get asked all the time, why didn't the RNC ever hire this kid to do anything? Because they really don't speak a certain language, so maybe they don't see the value that someone like Scott Pressler can bring. And with this, what we're seeing here in Western Pennsylvania, Trump's performance in Allegheny is one of the reasons why he won the state in 16, but also why it was even competitive in 20, when it's really not with other Republicans until they get this through their heads. You mentioned the race before, Rick Saccone. He was not pro-union, and we pulled that race all the way up until the Sunday before the election, and I saw Trump go out there, hold that rally, and he just convinced registered Democrats, many of them, okay, go ahead and vote for Rick Saccone, even though that Rick had that terrible record. And Rick was down on Thursday. Rick was down 8 points. By Sunday, he was down only 2 points or a point. You know, it was really close. I think he wound up losing by less than a point, right? Something like that. It was still very close.
Like 600 votes. I mean, 600 votes.
Close. But he would have gotten killed if Donald Trump did not go out there and do that. And then he made several comments in that rally where, you know, the sweater vest Republican and the media talking head, you know, basically holds their breath. Can't believe he said that. But they don't understand how funny, like, the steelworkers just thought that comment was. And now you got their attention. And okay, Donald, I'll vote for your guy. You know, I mean, it was really something else. You know?
Yeah, it's a good point. And like, there's so much here. So to address the part of your question about Scott Presler, he's incredible. The Republican Party needs 100 more of him. And they should be investing, you know, time and energy into finding people just like him. And frankly, the Democrats have committed for the 2024 election something like $250 million in dark money in ballot operations in swing states. Republicans simply don't have an answer to that. And, you know, one of the things that drive me crazy, and we talked a little bit about this, Rich, on my podcast, you see these pundits and consultants who get paid to do this for a living. And again, a lot of these folks are going from one campaign to the next. They lament Trump candidates or non-traditional Republicans getting in the race, and they think that they can't win. It just drives me crazy because, and again, do the same comparison as before, Rich. You had Kari Lake, who is by and large probably my favorite candidate in the 2022 cycle. Largely considered to be a MAGA candidate, as MAGA America first as they come. Compare her, you know, she's in a swing state of Arizona. Compare her to Adam Laxalt in the swing state of Nevada. Adam Laxalt is an incredible guy, was a great Senate candidate, but largely considered to be establishment. Both Kari Lake and Adam lost, not because Adam Laxalt was establishment and not because Kari Lake was MAGA. They got beat by the Democrat machine. And Republicans have not, I mean, the leadership of our party has simply not, well, they might realize it in the periphery, but they've not taken action to implement any changes. And in a state like Pennsylvania, our backs are already up against the wall because the strategy in Pennsylvania has to be twofold. And I've said this over and over and over again. Republicans have a 400,000+ voter registration deficit. It means there are 400,000 plus more Democrats in this state than Republicans. So a Democrat can win the state of Pennsylvania without a single Republican vote. So the first phase of any operation on going after the system in Pennsylvania is having a strong, you know, voter registration system that's tied into the State Department's API on the actual website where you can track the voter rolls, and you just invest millions of dollars. I'm telling you, you need millions of dollars to close the voter registration deficit, at least by 50, 100,000 people. And then the second phase of that operation is, you know, getting out there and finding low propensity voters who voted for President Trump in 2020, but they maybe didn't come out in off cycle or subsequent elections thereafter, opt them into the automatic mail-in ballot program to be ensure that they're mailed a ballot to their doorstep in every election for the rest of their life. And then you just build out the operation from there. And the reason why this is so important, and people don't talk about this in our party enough, is that when you approach elections like that, it's like you're looking at a spreadsheet. When you know who has received a ballot and who's returned a ballot, you can check them off. And the more people that do that, you can divert your resources in a more surgical way to get out the votes in other critical areas.
That's right.
Republicans just depend on election day. And as you saw in Maricopa County, half the machines go down, people go home, they don't vote again. You know, or by the way, look, you know, Democrat controlled cities. Oh, there's construction on election day, or a water main break. And all of a sudden it depresses Republican turnout. But you can't show your hand to the enemy, political enemy, and show them how you fight. And Republicans have done that and have not changed their tactics, techniques, or procedures at all. And it's been much to the detriment. And so it's not about, oh, well, look at Trump's poor endorsement record and, oh, well, that person lost because it's a MAGA candidate. That's ridiculous. Now, of course, candidate quality matters. I mean, you can't be running crazy people, you know, but like the difference between Adam Laxalt and Kari Lake was not MAGA versus like establishment. It was the system, the Democrat system that beat them. And the sooner that Republicans wake up to that reality, the better we'll perform in elections, both statewide and at the district level.
Yeah, we spoke about an article that was in NBC News. We spoke about this on Monday, and it was how bad the data game is for Republicans, but also how bad their ground game is. So Democrats are either relying on volunteers, people like before Scott Presler partnered with Turning Point, but he did that out of passion, right? Not because he was getting paid $13 an hour to do it. And Adam Laxalt's campaign was mentioned in that article because it used the old model the consultants tell you to use. Here's $10 an hour, go advertise, a job for door knockers on Craigslist, because that's where there's a handful of door knocking firms that can handle campaigns nationally, go all over the country. And that's what they'll do. That's largely where they get their door knockers from. When Democrats get their door knockers, they pay them a fortune. And then for the most part, they also have legions of volunteers that are going out and doing that because they want to do it. So this was a major problem. And NBC went over that data. They got geolocation data, Sean, and Adam Laxalt's knockers were marking off the fake interviews. And they never went and knocked on the doors. One person was like, "Oh yeah, I'm in this, I'm somewhere in a neighborhood in Vegas. I'm banging out that neighborhood." He was at Caesar's Palace gambling, Sean, with the money he just earned, $13 an hour to knock on the doors. I don't mean to laugh, but it's like, it's so foolish. And it's happened for years. And the people that were in that article were saying, we have been trying to shine a light on these problems for years. Nobody's listening. They're just not listening.
Well, I mean, Rich, it's a problem with our donors. And I don't mean this necessarily in a negative way, because our mega donors, we have a lot of them, but they're not necessarily getting accurate information from the people that they need to get accurate information from. So their perspective on this in many ways hasn't shifted. And the Democrats never want for money. Act Blue is a freight train. I mean, if you just look at John Fetterman, I think he had a small dollar donations from every zip code in the country. So Democrats have done a much better job, and their super donors understand the fight and the rules of engagement in every battleground state, and they implement change and they invest in it, Rich. If we had, some of the Republican billionaires in this country saying, okay, we are going to stand up a national, strategy for elections, and they're going to be surgical based on the laws in each swing state, and we are going to give this organization $100 million. Now, keep in mind, even that is less than half of what the Democrats have invested in an operation just like that. Democrats are spending $250 million on this. And so we don't have anything like that. And what we need is our donors to understand the rules of engagement in these battleground states. And instead of dumping, I want Ron DeSantis to win. And by the way, I think Ron DeSantis was a great governor. I like him. Instead of investing $100 million, $50 million in a super PAC for him to run commercials, like maybe we should be investing in a national apparatus. Instead of fighting each other with that money, invest in a national apparatus that focuses on elections. And by the way, that's not just getting out the vote. We are getting beat to the punch in election integrity lawsuits in critical states all across the country. Pennsylvania was one of them. Like, we didn't have answers to Mark Elias when he fought the redistricting map that was adopted in Pennsylvania, which, by the way, was a map that he drew. We had a redistricting map which was passed by the Republican-controlled House, or passed by the Republican-controlled Senate, and was held up with Governor Wolf. But the reality is the governor doesn't have any real power to draw districting maps in Pennsylvania. That's a responsibility of the legislature. Well, Elias filed an emergency motion in the state of Pennsylvania that was initially declined by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, but the second time it was taken up. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, anybody who pays attention to this stuff knows that they're like a 5-2 Democrat supermajority, and they find ways to rule in favor of the Democrats all the time. And not only did they dismiss the Republican map, which was drawn by the legislature, which is a constitution bestowed, or a responsibility bestowed on them by our Constitution, they adopted Elias's map. And so, I mean, Republicans had no response to that. Not only like they were way behind the power curve, you know? And so why don't we have an organization like this nationwide that's all working together with one centralized war room with $150 million in the bank doing this stuff? Until we're ready to commit at that level, we are going to be fighting an uphill battle.
And who was in charge of redistricting efforts for Republicans? The man who just announced he was running for president. I mean, a lot of people don't even know this because he was so hands off and he didn't do anything. But Chris Christie was the one who was supposed to be in charge of Republicans getting favorable districts around the country. And he's running for president. This is just, again, you know, it's like one failure after the other. And then people think they're entitled for something more after they failed at their prior job. You know, look, I got to say this, on, I think it was Sunday, whenever the NBC article first came out, I did get a call from a donor saying, "Is this true? Basically, is what they're saying true?" Because I can't imagine how much money had been wasted. This person gave to at least one of those campaigns that was in that article. And I said after that, the conversation, I wanted to make a point, and I told the viewers this a couple of times. Despite all of those disadvantages, Sean, right? All the get out the vote disadvantages. It's not even like a harvest the vote disadvantage. Despite all of it, Trump still won 16 and barely lost in 2020. So he's just a turnout machine. And
he is.
I think that masked the problem for a long time. Republicans weren't really understanding how bad the problem was because when he was on the ballot, it was very difficult to even detect. He got a huge number of votes. In the poll we just did in Florida, we're now adding, and I'm going to start adding it to national too, the option to not vote, right? So in Florida, which is Governor DeSantis' own state, the number of people who said, or the percentage of people who said they would not vote if their preferred nominee was not the nominee is twice as much for Ron DeSantis. So in other words, the electorate is bigger for Donald Trump. He gets more people to come out. And where was a ton of those votes coming from? The Gold Coast, Miami, and then other little rural pockets like Greater Alachua around Gainesville. He just has this ability to bring people out that nobody else has. And if Republicans don't close this gap, then when Donald Trump's not on the ballot, the future is going to be rough for them, is my point. Because they're just not going to be able to do it, Sean. In national election, they're going to get killed.
I mean, look,
and I know you got to go. You want to?
No, it's okay. I look, Rich. I think that you're right. In a state like Pennsylvania, Donald Trump brings out a very eclectic cross section of voters, and there's no question that turnout is needed in order for people to win. I mean, to me, if you go back and look at a county by county vote breakdown in Pennsylvania when Toomey and Trump were both on the ballot. This is where I think if Republicans, if the establishment stopped fighting with, America first, they could really complement each other well. And I think what happened in 2016 is that Trump brought out this crazy eclectic cross section of voters, and ultimately that got Toomey across the finish line. Now, Toomey performed a little bit better in the Southeast and in some of the suburbs and stuff, but they complemented each other on the ballot because they were so ideologically different. And in a presidential cycle in a state like Pennsylvania, with the election laws the way that they were in 2016, people that voted for Trump at the top of the ticket, most of the time, if they wouldn't have turned out and not voted for Toomey. And that's what ultimately got him across the finish line. And so you're right. Trump does bring out the vote in ways that other candidates haven't been able to figure out. But this is why Republicans need to focus on changing the way that they think, because there's a way to capture those low propensity voters, those only Trump voters who maybe voted in 16 and 20 for President Trump. There's a way to capture who they are and make sure that they turn out in every subsequent election, but we just haven't been able to do it.
Well said. Look, the Steak for Breakfast article was awesome. I got to thank you for coming on. And folks, if you haven't checked that out, I saw you retweet it, and I have I signed up over there. So I was like, oh, let me check this out. You were on with a couple other guests. It was really good. If people haven't seen it, it's Steak for Breakfast, National Pulse. It was a really good podcast. But tell people when your show is, Sean, and how to follow you on social media.
Yeah, thank you for giving me an opportunity to say that. I've got a host. It's a podcast called Battleground. We have great candidates on. We talk about politics, but we also really just talk about leadership and overcoming adversity. And one of the things that I decided today is that I'm going to have more, 20 years of war. We just talked about it a lot today, Rich, but 20 years of war, and we have very few things to show for it, except for an entire generation of warriors who fought those wars with an immense amount of knowledge. So I'm going to do everything that I can to give those people a platform to tell their stories, to help educate our culture and our leaders about what it means to go to war and the true cost of what that is. And I'm excited about it. We just rolled out our first episode today with one of my old squad leaders, infantry squad leaders, who did 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan. He's an amazing guy. And we roll out episodes every Wednesday, and it's on Rumble. And you can just punch in my name, Sean Parnell, Battleground, whatever. And every Wednesday, a new episode comes out. And it's been really, really fun to be a part of. So, I mean, follow me over there, guys. I need your help.
Yeah, go check it out, guys. I'm going to check it out when I'm done with the show. And also that Bob Lazar, I didn't see that on Joe Rogan. I'm going to have to go check that out later today too. But that's sounds really cool, Sean, because those guys got stories that people need to hear. And I think you're going to be the only place to really get them, because that's just not what mainstream media, that's not the story they want to tell. They don't want to give those personal human event stories and experience stories like that. They don't want to come at it from that angle. And that's a shame, because those people should be heard more than the talking heads, right? The policy talking heads. They have a lot less to say than those guys. So I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to check it out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean, for coming on. And, come back when you have more time. I'd appreciate it.
Anytime you need me, I'll come back. Thanks, Rich.
Sounds great. I'll take you up on that. Have a great rest of the day, brother. I'll see you soon.
All right. See you, Rich. Take care.
You too. Sean Parnell, everybody go check out the podcast Battleground. It's awesome. I want to go and check out that episode, as a matter of fact, when I'm done with the show today. So Ruben, let's drill down into the map a little bit, but Sean's got a lot to say, a lot of great things to say about a lot. And we have a very similar worldview, even as people who signed up to serve after 9/11, very gung-ho. Some part of that is your views will evolve over time with how government behaves itself. But also some of that is getting older and getting wiser. I mean, they lied about everything, so you can be 21 and beat the hell out of a war drum yourself and then evolve later in life too. That's why I can't wait to check out that episode about Battleground he's put up, because I'd like to hear their side of the story too. You never get that. You just don't get, and it's all right. You can be proud of your service and criticize. And by the way, I mean, the highest form of patriotism is when you criticize your government for doing the wrong thing. I did not make that up, by the way. Look it up. That's a known quote. All right, so let's pull up this national map and drill into it a little bit more. I wanted to really get into some of these interviews. Okay, let's just get an overall regional feel for this. All right, so you do see DeSantis doing well in some of the more, Florida, it's not really surprising to me. He did well in Pima, for instance, and parts of Vegas. He did well in the more liberal parts of Vegas. Where else? What can we say here? Dane County, Wisconsin. Wisconsin is going to be a funny one. Okay. Wisconsin voted for Ted Cruz. It was closer than some polls suggested. It was one state where they thought they were going to blow Trump out. They did not. It was closer, but Cruz ended up winning it. Obviously, the end of it all was in Indiana. And you can really see Trump's strength in the Rust Belt, the South, the Mid-Atlantic, Appalachia. Look at him. I mean, he just rides Appalachia right up. Even in the Sun Belt states. So we were thinking, Georgia, is that a place that DeSantis could mount a fight? The Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll, which is not one of my favorite polls, that's for sure. They have a liberal bent 50% of the time, a more educated bent 50% of the time, according to analysis by Real Clear Politics. Excuse me. And by the way, I like the analysis on Real Clear Politics better than on certain other websites like 5-Turd Fake, because there's not some secret formula. It's a very simple thing. They explain to you how they gauge that pollster and how often or not a pollster did, well or not. Trump absolutely is killing it in the 5-borough area. So that's why you can see between Eastern Pennsylvania and in South New York. I mean, he's Southeastern New York. He's just crushing it. This is something people are going to have to pay attention to. In New Hampshire, he was crushing it. All the way riding up. All you can see, I mean, there's not many interviews in a state like Maine, but you could see it's all Trump, all Trump. Parts of Virginia, DeSantis did well in. I'm not surprised to see that at all. There were some parts of Virginia, yet Trump was still significantly ahead there. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll, I think, was Trump +8. So that was Georgia. We would probably have more like a Trump +15. But then again, things have changed since then. So maybe that's what it is. The South is not competitive. The Kentuckys, the Tennessees, South Carolina, he's crushing everyone in South Carolina. This is something where, we're all paying attention. Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. There isn't a way to beat Donald Trump if you don't stop him in these big delegate-rich states where he is just absolutely killing it. Illinois has a lot of delegates. New York has a lot of delegates. Massachusetts has, a decent number of delegates. States like that. In California, which is their big strategy to beat Trump in California, if they can, beat him in San Diego. There was a straw poll. It was close. DeSantis took it. It's a straw poll, though. All right. In overall voting electorate, San Diego would be more competitive. I think DeSantis would do better. You can see him doing better in Orange County. Actually, if I can zoom in, you can actually see that Ron DeSantis is doing better in Orange County. But look, actually, LA is going to be a problem for them. Trump is dominating in some of these big urban areas where I think Republicans thought that liberal and moderate Republican voters were going to be able to be their path. The truth is there's not really enough of them. And then there's this overlapping areas where they're urban. And yes, the people say they're moderate, but actually they don't like moderate Republicans or the moderate wing of the Republican Party. So someone like a Ron DeSantis or a Mike Pence, they're not doing well there. So this happened in 2016 as well. They thought they were going to try to stifle him in that place like California, other places like that. It didn't work out, and Trump wound up just basically sweeping. What else? Even in the plain states where we thought Trump would be kind of weak, he's doing fairly well. I mean, just an absolute bloodbath in the central part of the country. Maybe this will change over time, folks. But again, when we're looking at something like 50, plus, still almost 60, I said we're very close to the Morning Consult poll. We're very close to the Emerson poll. And it hasn't really moved all that much. DeSantis went from 16 to 18. All right. The sampling error is 2.1. So, and then on the same token, Trump going from like 60.9 to 59.7. Is it real movement? I don't know. It's within the sampling error. I think undecided went from 4.9 to 5.1. I'd have to go back and look, actually. Let me see. No, undecided went from 5.0 to 5.1. Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Vivek Ramaswamy, they're all in single digits. Larry Elder's under 1%. Asa Hutchinson's under 1%. There's still about 3% that say someone else. This may change a little bit. There were a couple interviews that didn't trickle in, and I was waiting for it, but I wanted to get what was done and ready for the show and processed. What was already processed, I wanted that done. Crosstabs will be out soon. I'll link them in this graph here. It's the way I think we're going to do this from now on. Is put up a big old graphic, let you guys check out where the interviews are. Read what you want about them. By the way, some of them you see that there's a scroll effect. Click on the interview like I just did, and it'll pin it there. All right. So here we have a person. Likelihood of her voting is greater than 50%. Not quite certain, which is greater than 90, but it's still a likely voter. Female, 20, and she's 21 years old. She's white, not Hispanic. Identifies as being conservative. Education, she's got a high school education. Income 50 to 100,000, is working full time, is single, has one or more children. They're under 18 but not yet school aged. Is not a military, active duty military or a veteran, a Protestant, and in an urban area. You see what I mean? Like, there is this strength Trump has in certain urban areas. Why does that matter? Why do I keep bringing it up? Because normally these Republican nomination battles come down to, oh, we got a rhino in the rhino lane, and then we have for instance, a conservative who's, they're going to win in the rural area. The rhino's going to win in the urban areas, and then they're going to fight it out in the suburbs. And because conservatives split their vote, the rhino is usually going to slip through. That's how Mitt Romney did it. That was his whole map to victory. And same thing for John McCain. That's not the case here this time. They couldn't find a rhino who was doing better good enough in urban areas because of some of Trump's positions that, for instance, on trade, certainly Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, his positions there are popular in those areas. So that happened in the last nomination. It's happening again. Trump is winning those areas. Plus, he's winning heavily in most rural areas. Not all. There's some rurals that have a more traditional Ben Shapiro kind of brand of conservatism. But for the most part, yes, Trump is winning that. And then you have, for instance, somebody like Tim Scott, who does well in some urban areas. And you can see that here. Hold on, let me unclick this. And is that Pence, too, has some urban support. Interestingly, Pence's urban support is also still not educated or uncredentialed, let's call it. It's odd. I don't, it's like Pence has like what looks closely like a Trump voter, or at the surface like a Trump voter until you drill down a little bit more. All right. What else? Of course, I'm going to share this map on Locals. So, and for YouTube members, I'll post it there as well first, before I get the crosstabs up. And then eventually everyone will have access to it, but not until we get the crosstabs up. But remarkably stable race. It may change here and there a little bit. For the most part, though, it's going to remain very, very close to these margins. And you can see why. This is a dominating performance by Trump. Drilling into Florida, again, very close to what we saw in our Florida specific poll, right? Where DeSantis most definitely has some panhandle support, but it's more in the Tallahassee, Gadsden, Leon area. He's got some support in Jacksonville. Actually, he did better here, but it's less interviews. He did better here than he did in our state level poll, while Trump just kills it in Miami. And again, really, what is this coming down to? Look, here's a perfect example. Certain to vote. This isn't someone who lives in Miami. Voting for Donald Trump is a female, is 43 years old, Hispanic, Latina, conservative, some college or an associate degree, $30,000 to $50,000 a year, working full time, is married, has children under 18 that are school aged, not a military or a vet, Catholic, living in a suburb of Miami. All right, so this is a confirmation of what we had basically seen. And you can see Trump doing good in the wiregrass areas as well, rural wiregrass areas. But in the Orlando area, he actually did better here. They were tied in the Orlando Atlantic Coast region, which is this, folks. All right. They were tied when you have this region overall together. Here, Trump did better because of he was outperforming in the Orlando area more so than he did in the state poll. All right. And then you have the Tampa Bay area where Trump is ahead. And right now, currently, he's ahead in all three. Trump, the Tampa area is Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas. All right. So Trump is actually ahead in all three of those, that entire region. But it doesn't really matter. There doesn't appear to be one county where DeSantis is doing better or not. This one right here is the gray from now on is going to be an unsure vote. I figured I'd make it gray gray it out because someone else I'll make purple, which is usually our undecided color. But we're going to make undecided gray. There are just so many damn dots that it's hard. We're running out of colors on the spectrum. Eventually, I'm going to settle on colors for all of these candidates. I think we're going to, and by the way, this was done before Chris Christie announced. We're going to add these right here. What color should we do for Chris Christie? What do you think? What's a good Christie color, guys? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? I don't know. Let me think it over. I just need them to be so definitively different that you can see major difference. Last place I want to go to here is Georgia real quick. I know we're running out of time. And look at how Trump does in Fulton County. And then in North Georgia is Republican. You have some votes in and around the Atlanta metro area for DeSantis, but for the most part, South Georgia is more Trumpian than Republican. And then North is typically traditional Republican, which is why you see DeSantis doing pretty well there. But then I should actually put the state in there as well, but everyone should know the state. But I could label them if you want. But Trump doing obviously much better in, again, urban areas where you think that it is. But it's pretty interesting. See, that's actually one interview, dark as can be. It's not red. People are having a hard time understanding this. This is a city. So there's so many people so closely clustered together that it is that color red for Trump, only it doesn't look it because they're overlapped so much on each other. And when you back up, it shows you that there are actually two interviews there. All right. Somebody had asked about this on Locals. Same thing here. There's got to be a better way to do it. I know. Maybe I can set the tolerance differently and it'll space them out. All right. So you can see South Carolina. North Carolina is a Trump blowout right now. I don't really care what anybody says. North Carolina is a blowout for Donald Trump. And then you have New Jersey also, by the way, has a ton of delegates. And you can see DeSantis doing well in the Atlantic area. But for the most part, New Jersey is going to go overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis would probably be in the single digits right now. New Hampshire is very, very small. But the small sample size clearly shows that Donald Trump has more strength there. So this is really cool. I'm loving the way we're going here because I think it's more information. And you know my philosophy, folks. More transparent, the better. The more transparent, the better. Because when you have these bogus, the right is starting to fudge polls. All right, I'm just going to say it out loud. The right is fudging polls. There are certain people on the right who are making shit up. And I can't stand it anymore. I just can't stand it. Two wrongs do not make a right like this. The right should not be doing what they're doing because they can't stand the front runner. And nobody should be tolerating it either. When you're that far out of the consensus, routinely, it can happen to anybody. You could have an outlier. But when you're that far out of the consensus, this is disgusting. This is intentionally. It's routinely. It's backed by super PAC money. It's backed by establishment money. It's backed by Wall Street. They're paying to lie to people. That's for the left. Not the right. We've spent too much time trying to get people to trust what we do. We have a bit of a moral high ground on this. And the rhino establishment is going to ruin it. They're going to wreck everything we've worked for. If a public pollster has you getting your ass kicked in Pennsylvania by double digits, you are not down by 2 in Minnesota. If 4 public polls show a 40-point margin in Iowa, you are not surging in Iowa. Shame. Shame. shame on them and shame on us for being quiet about it. So transparency is the name of the game. Instead of having people say, hey, what do you think about this poll? That poll says this. That's different than what you got. All we're going to do is be as transparent as we possibly can be. And when they're as transparent as we are, then we can say, then I will take their results as seriously. All right, it's 1:58. Don't miss on Friday. Special thanks to Sean Parnell for coming on the show. I know, I tell you what, Sean's a great guy. Great guy. Should be the senator of Pennsylvania right now. I'm sorry. But if disgusting tactics by people who can't win at the ballot box. Disgraceful. But he is he's the real deal. And I had a great time on his show. I'm so glad he was able to come on Inside the Numbers, and he's welcome back anytime. Special thanks to Sean. We'll see you on Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time. Laura, you got any announcements? Yeah, because I know he called you earlier today. Is that like a last minute thing? So we'll be on tonight, or?
I'm not sure. I didn't get a response, so
it may have.
We'll see.
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
But with that being said, it's summertime. Today is the last day of school. So to all those mommies and daddies,
I want to go hug my daughter. I can hear her. I'm so proud of her.
I'm so proud. I don't want to cry, so I'm not talking about it.
I'll tell you what. I told locals this earlier this morning, and I told them yesterday too. I walked my daughter to the bus and put her on the bus for the last time as an elementary student. And I flashed back in a moment to when I took her, and she was this big. You can't even see my hand. That's how little she was. She was up to my kneecap.
Maybe.
I remember, her very first day at pre-K, Florida. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, but you're going to make me cry, all right?
She was so confident. And I'm like, you going to be all right, honey? You want Daddy to walk you all the way in? No, Daddy. I got this. I got this. She was so confident. And that's because she's me. She's like her daddy, like that. Take on the world.
Okay.
And I will never forget
Take that glory. Good.
Do you remember the bows, Laura, the JoJo bows that she used to wear? I remember the.
You mean the JoJo bows that you couldn't manage to get in her hair?
I sucked at those JoJo bows.
You did.
I had her in a ponytail cheating.
Lopsided ponytails.
And I just pop a JoJo bow on it, like bam, she's ready to go. She was so cute.
Meanwhile, that ponytail's hanging a little to the left, looking like the 80s called and wanted their ponytail back.
Punky Brewster style.
Oh, how'd it happen?
How does it happen?
That's what happened.
And this morning we put our son on the bus, although he walks himself to the end, but we we put him on the bus as a last time before he's a high school student.
Now he's taller than both of us.
He's bigger than me.
It's
not hard. I'm a short guy, but he's gonna be. He's
gonna be gigantic.
He's your dad and my grandpa mixed together. It looks like.
Yeah.
He's gonna have big, broad shoulders. He's gonna be able to use his fist as a human hammer. He's a big kid. He's gonna be big. Yet he's a gentle giant.
Yes.
I can't get him to play football. Even Reigns, when he played for UF, couldn't get him to play. I met Reigns when we were still, we are always Gators. But when Reigns was at the height of his career there, met him and his mama, remember? And she was like, you look just like my boy when he was your age. She was such a sweet woman. And she, he was like, you want to play football? He's like, I don't like to hurt people. I'm like, oh, what an embarrassment. No, I'm kidding.
He doesn't like the idea of running somebody over.
Doesn't like to hurt anyone. Yeah.
He's a
not
sweet
unless
baby.
he has to.
Well,
yeah, he's going to be driving soon.
Oh, stop it, Snowman.
I'm serious, man. Snowman, I got to go and take him for driver's ed already. I kid you not.
This is ridiculous.
Yeah, they drive early here too. Yep. Very early. Florida, the South. I've been living in a couple places in the South, and it seems like their kids drive early. All right. So I'm going to go before I tear up. Keep an eye out for the crosstabs. All right. And check them out.
Yeah, we'll see y'all on Free Will on Friday.
See you on Free Questions ready. Again, thanks to Sean Parnell. That was awesome, and it was almost an hour about. Really appreciate having his time today. All right, folks, I'm out. Nothing but love for you. Be safe. See you Friday. Deuces. Keep an eye on the social media in case I do have this thing going on tonight. See ya.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be. I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette.